Podcasters Roundtable round 137. We're back. It's 2020. 2020? Which way do you like to say it? 2020. This is the first round back. So happy to kick off the new year. We're 10 days into it as recording this. And Daniel J. Lewis, co-host, welcome back.
Thank you. With eggnog in my hand. Happy New Year. Happy podcasting.
You still have all like the lights are still up. The tree is still, he just doesn't want it to end. You're the extended through halfway through January. My tree is still up actually. So, all right. And Kevin, new podcaster, welcome, man.
Thank you for being here.
Glad
to be able to join.
What's your podcast?
I'm the host of the Throttle podcast. We've been around for about 4 years, and we focus on motorcycle news, just what's going on in the motorcycling world, and we have a variety of different co-hosts now. So it's been a lot of fun. Very
cool. All right. Well, I titled the email that went out to this something like "Don't make this mistake." You know, very nice and clickbait like, and because if you're not signed up, podcastersroundtable.com/guest will also get you on here. Eventually, you'll get a sign-up sheet, but you also get emails when we go live. And need to do something. Maybe we're going to talk about making mistakes. Maybe I'm doing something wrong where not enough people are opening those emails. Uh-oh. Speaking of mistakes, we got a loop. Oh, all right. We got Eric trying to get in, but I don't think the audio is playing very nicely for him. So we'll get him in here. This is a good reason. So Eric's having trouble getting in, and I was asking him behind the scenes when we fired this thing up, do you just have a USB microphone that you can throw in? Which is a great reason. If you're doing, even podcasting, right? If you're connecting with someone remotely, maybe even by yourself, if you have like a setup where you have an XLR microphone, where there might be multiple stages of gear, right? A mixer, maybe an interface. If one of those goes down, you might be out of commission. Online, we're doing streaming things like this. All kinds of weird things happen, right? Browsers don't like things. There might be multiple reasons. In that case, and we've done it several times on the show, it's like get a USB microphone, stick it direct to computer, and you still have your good audio. So even if that's like, maybe you're past that point, and I say past that point, not in a way that it's better, but maybe you've gone, like I said, more gear, XLR microphone. It is still good to go spend $50 on a Q2U and have that as a backup tool. It's always good to be redundant in any of your gear. Let's focus a little bit on that. Kevin, you said you certainly have a couple of mistakes that you've made in podcasting. What would one of those be?
So, my main one was, when during the show, we were actually, this happened not too long ago. So we were 3 years, everything's kind of working just fine. I haven't changed anything. Then for various reasons, I decided, hey, I want to change how I'm hosting it. I was hosting it on my own site and my own RSS, and was starting to have some issues with that, just about the quality of the recording, and I was getting a lot of things corrupted. I tried to upload them and they'd be out there for a while, and then somebody would go and try to live stream it from the where it was at. It wouldn't work. So I moved everything to Libsyn, changed my RSS feed, did all that.
That was your mistake. Libsyn, you're the mistake. No, I'm kidding.
No, and Libsyn's been great. The issue is that I lost 2/3 of my audience because everywhere you publish your show, they don't automatically always update your feeds, right? Or the user has to unsubscribe and resubscribe. Well, not everybody's going to email you and ask what's going on. They're just assuming your show's dead and they move on, and it takes a while. Like I've had people come back and they're just like, oh, well, we thought you stopped doing the show, but I saw something on Facebook that you were on a different podcast as a guest. So that's the only ways that we've gotten some of them back. But that's been my biggest faux pas. Obviously there's the little things you do every episode that drive you crazy that almost nobody notices.
Yeah. Daniel, how do you think he could have mitigated that mistake in moving, if you have to move to a new host? Which is different than just moving RSS feeds, right?
Yeah. And, you could actually do what I'm about to say and maybe get some of your audience back, depending on how many people are still subscribed to that old feed. But when you leave FeedBurner, one of the best ways to do that is when you delete your feed, you set up a redirect, a permanent redirect, but it redirects to whatever the source feed was for FeedBurner. So if, for example, if you were using PowerPress on your website and that was your original feed or source feed going into FeedBurner, and then you switch over to using the Libsyn feed, then you change that feed inside of FeedBurner. So yes, it's switching the source feed, and then you delete the feed, but you put that check mark on with permanent redirection. And then that puts a permanent redirect there. So anyone looking for the old feed is forwarded over to the new one. Now, the reason I said you could still do that is because if you remember what the feed URL used to be, if you've completely deleted that FeedBurner feed, if you remember what that FeedBurner URL used to be, you could run your Libsyn feed through FeedBurner, use that old URL again, then delete it with the permanent redirection, and then maybe get some of those listeners back. Maybe.
Yeah, I found my biggest problem was the apps that people use, like Podcast Addict, and different things like that. They're not refreshing or respecting that. They and looking at some things after plugging in some diagnostics, there was a lot of 401s coming back and everything else. So it wasn't respecting that when you actually look at the call, it's like, hey, this is a reroute, and it wouldn't take that extra step to follow that. If you unsubscribed and resubscribed using the same app, it would pick up just fine. But it took that extra thing. And when I contacted probably 6 or 7 different apps that a lot of people use, that was their thing. Is we'll just have them unsubscribe and resubscribe. I was like, well, if they can't get my feed, how am I supposed to spread that message to them? You put it on Facebook and Twitter, but not everybody follows you. And so that's kind of what happened to us. And because I actually did that and had the permanent redirect in there for everything.
Daniel, were you referring to where his feed address, where it was coming from originally, when it was hosted on his site?
Yes. Yeah, if that was going through FeedBurner, or I kind of wonder if maybe a lot of people were somehow subscribed directly to your site feed, bypassing your FeedBurner. And so there's nothing redirecting that audience. Or it could be the numbers you saw before weren't accurate, but what you see now are. Yeah. Like FeedBurner's stats, if you were using those and comparing those to Libsyn.
It was actually Libsyn stats, and the feed was the last thing, so I kind of did it in stages. And so it was the Libsyn stats, and then it was when I actually disconnected FeedBurners when it went just absolutely crazy.
Is it amazing we're still kind of having the conversation about getting off FeedBurner? To be honest, at work, we have a show that is still connected, and it is a big show. So there have been various reasons why people have hesitated to do things moving. It's in a very slow process of migrating that off. But one thing I noticed is that show has a large email subscription list via FeedBurner. So what do you do in that case? Do you export all those and then shove them into like your own MailChimp? And then don't you have to ask those people to resubscribe, or can you just automatically move their email? I mean, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about like ethics and actual laws with, spam, canned spam laws or whatever they fall under. Have you seen that? Have you migrated the emails before? Because that is another thing to look at. And you do need to look at that if you're moving FeedBurner. There may be a large section if you're using that option for subscription via email, which I think you should definitely use. Not necessarily FeedBurners. But.
Yeah, if they opted in, which they would have had to on FeedBurner, then it's okay for you to take that to another provider and import them because they have already opted in, as long as you're continuing to provide the same content through email. ActiveCampaign and MailChimp do let you import subscribers without having them resubscribe. Other platforms like Aweber, I think Aweber may have changed, I think a couple years ago, which way they do it. But some of these other platforms do require, if you're going to import people, either you have to go through some kind of business verification process, which is nice of them to do, or maybe there's something else that you have to do to get your subscribers to resubscribe. But that's to your email notifications.
Any mistakes that you think our audience would benefit from, Daniel, that you made?
Yeah, the biggest mistake I've made for my main podcast, The Audacity to Podcast. is calling it the Audacity to Podcast. Because when I first created it, I always had in mind the two meanings for Audacity, both the software, because I wanted to talk about that software specifically a lot, since no one else was really talking specifically about that software, just referencing that it was a thing out there at that time back in 2010. And I also wanted it to mean the guts, the courage. My little tagline for the podcast, giving you the guts and teaching you the tools, that's been there since the beginning. But today, now that I don't talk about Audacity as much, I certainly don't feature it. Whenever I tell people I host the Audacity to Podcast, they hear the word Audacity and they immediately respond often saying, "Oh yeah, I use Audacity." And it's a frustration that I put myself into. And I've thought about renaming my podcast, but I'm stuck with the name and it's stuck on me. And I don't want to change the name
Yeah,
because it's such a strong brand now.
we've definitely talked about switching your brand. That was actually a long time ago. We had some good conversations about that. And I think, picking a name is tough also because it seems to be, it's like one of the first things you do early on, right? Before you know anything, before you generally have done, if it's your first podcast. If it's not, then you might have learned a lesson about naming. But yeah, it can be tricky with domains and titles, and someone else might have your title or you didn't look that up. I mean, there's so much goes into a name and even with keywords and search and you name it. So I think a lot of people probably at some point, I like the Podcasters Studio. Podcasters Roundtable is fine. It's a little long, but it's fine. The Podcaster Studio, there are times where I wish the wasn't there. Obviously, I have the domain, right? Go register the other domains that you want. Just Podcaster Studio. I mean, yes, Podcaster Studio. And, there's two S's. Sometimes people might not get that in there. So get the other domain. So you end up owning like 3 or 4 domains for your one show. If you can afford it, go get the alternate spellings or the things that are wrong. But yeah, changing a show. I mean, what goes into changing a name outside of making the change, right? Like outside of just saying we are now this, what other considerations have to go into that? I mean, you don't want to do it because you think, the Audacity podcast is so ingrained in your audience. I mean, they would move with the change, right? I mean, we've seen this probably with big podcasts before, but what's the, besides having an emotional attachment to the name, what other considerations do you think about?
Well,
I've thought about, at least for mine, how strongly it communicates. Like I've thought, and don't try and register this domain because I already have it and I've had it for a while. Audacious Podcasting was one of the other names I thought of calling it, but that just doesn't have the power, the oomph to it to me as the Audacity to Podcast. And so I recently just finally fully committed to it, and now I have swag and stickers and coasters and magnets that have my branding on it. So it's kind of like when Steve Jobs came out with the Think Different campaign. Well, grammatically, it should be think differently. But Steve Jobs was very adamant that he said, it just doesn't feel right to say think differently. It doesn't communicate what I want it to. I'm kind of that way with other forms of using the word Audacity for my podcast. I could maybe rebrand it to something completely different, but I don't want to.
Remember iPad? Everyone thought that was a big mistake, but now could you imagine it being anything else? Yeah. There was a lot of memes. Before memes existed, there was I feel like a lot of iPad memes. Kevin, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, mine's the Throttled with a D, Throttled Podcast, right? And the URL is Throttled Podcast. And so a lot of times when I say it on the show, I have to emphasize, hey, email me at Throttled Podcast, or whatever. And so I have to emphasize that just because, when you're talking about motorcycles, there's only so many things that you do, and I wanted to be generic. I didn't want to be brand or type of bike specific, so I wanted to try to do something that was a little play off of word a little bit, but what ended up happening is I've had several people ask me, so have you had like anger issues or something because you're throttling, or and it's always said in jest, but it's kind of like ever since I did it, I've never been 100% like sold on it, but it was the best I could do at a time. And then I go back to, I was like, hey, just get started.
Yeah. Exactly.
And we grew pretty quick at the beginning for what I was expecting us to do. And it just turned into, well, that's just it. And that's what everybody knows us as, is throttled, you know. And over time, when I'm talking to people, I don't say, hey, I do the throttled podcast. I was like, I do a podcast. It's called Throttled. That helps. Your presentation can help get over a name that you may not be 100% sold on. But like a lot of what like Daniel said is, it's, you know, you either have to go all in, or, you know, and just accept that, hey, that's what it is. And to me, rebranding becomes an issue, because if anybody listens to your back catalog and, oh, they want to do something, or they listening to something, you know, there's a confusion about, wait a minute, I thought I downloaded this other podcast. Am I actually getting the right one? You know, and your back catalog to me is extremely valuable.
Yeah, that can definitely be one of the gotchas. You know, outside of, you could always change titles, but you're obviously going to probably be saying it, right? So someone presses play and they're like, what is this show? And then obviously if they come to it when it's, you know, the motorcycle podcast, and you guys are saying the throttle podcast, they are gonna wonder, am I in the right place? Probably. But
I mean, plus you've already paid for audio intros and all this other stuff, and you've produced you know, a lot of segments. So yeah, we just kind of went with it. And
I think the key takeaway is like you said, get started. You definitely, I mean, you do have to make a decision at some point. Don't let it drag on too long. Get started, and you can rebrand. I mean, like I said, we've had that conversation. We've had people with popular podcasts who did it, had no problems. So, you know, if you get to a point where it's like, I really don't want this name, change your name. Like, don't let it get in the way.
I've listened to that episode, and I've probably 2 or 3 times, and I keep considering it, but I always fall back to just like, oh, I'm just gonna leave it alone.
Yeah, no, I think you're fine. Do you have Throttle podcast without the D for all the typos?
I don't. It was actually taken when I signed up. That was a choice, and then it became available. Somebody else got it, and they started a podcast with 8 episodes, and so
and then they're done.
Yeah,
and they're sending you that traffic,
and they still have it. I try to get it from them, and they're just like, "Oh no, I might do an episode eventually." I was like, "It's been 2 years." I was like,
Daniel's the king of swooping in when they finally decide to get rid of that domain. Daniel, how do you keep watch so you can get it the moment they let it expire?
It's actually luck. Well, not completely luck. It's every now and then. So I recently purchased another competitor's domain. I think I've now purchased 5 or 6 competitors' domains.
I also highly doubt you leave much up to luck. So what's the secret?
True. So I see as it's falling apart. Like for this recent domain that I've acquired for a product that I used to recommend but don't recommend any longer, their domain expired. But I've been keeping an eye on it to see, when does the domain expire? Is the website still up? Is the business still existing? Does this person still exist? And I noticed that the website came down. So I started wondering, well, when's the domain going to expire? So I started watching the who is information on it, which is the information that shows you like expiration, registration dates and such for the domain. And at one point it became available for sale, very high price. I'm hoping it returns a profit on the investment. But it's just a matter of kind of knowing your competition. And so if you have a podcast, or if you ever name a domain in your podcast, you pretty much have to keep that domain forever. And that's one of the downsides, I think, of rebranding, is you really should keep that old domain in addition to your new domain for forever. For as long as your podcast is ever online, you have to keep all of those domains, I think, or lest someone else grab it. I mean, there was a site that I visited. I forget what the domain was, but I'm not going to say it anyway. But there was something that I was looking for on a domain that I knew used to exist. And I landed on a porn site from it. No joke. It used to be a podcast website. Now it's been taken over and grabbed up by some bot. And now it's, all that junk on there. So unless you want that to happen to your podcast, you kind of have to keep things for forever.
Well, I think Dave Jackson, who's not here, so he agrees for sure, is like the archive.org of domain names. So you could just, maybe he'll buy it from you, hold it, and then when you need it back, you can get it. Because Dave has like hundreds, right? So yeah, I mean, we end up, it's kind of like you just end up toting around a bunch of domains. But I bet almost every podcaster has more than one domain. But yeah, something to consider. I mean, like I said, I have probably 3 different alternate spellings for one podcast, and that's a bill that comes every month, and that's one reason, hey, if you can get a little income, affiliate links, whatever you can do, those are some of the costs that you want to cover, right? So if you're out there and you're making a little bit, every little bit counts, especially when it comes, there's all these sort of behind the scenes bills that I think a lot of people don't know. Hosting and domains, people assume you have one thing, you get the other maybe, but not with domains, especially if you have multiple domains for other reasons, whether it's rebranding or misspellings, etc. Cool. Any other mistakes? I guess I had this show itself. So we're doing video. I think we're gonna hopefully talk a little bit about adding video to a podcast, even though we talked about it, which then makes me think, oh, maybe it is important if we keep bringing it up on the podcast. But this show here was on blended into my other channel. Part of the reason was, which I have another successful channel just under my name, and I just started doing the roundtable and put it in that. I didn't want to create a whole other channel, and it did well through the exposure it received by being on that channel. But I noticed in the stats, what I would notice would happen is that as many subscribers as it was generating for the roundtable, it would then ungenerate for my own channel, because 50 people would sub and 50 people would unsubscribe, right? Because that's not the content they wanted from that channel. It was a really tough decision to move this to its own channel because of that exposure. So many people said, "Oh, I had no idea you had a podcast," right? They followed YouTube, and it brought in the right people, quote unquote, right? People who were there, who were looking for audio video stuff, found out about a podcast about podcasting, which is, there's a lot of crossover. And so it was hard to sort of kill that discovery. And we are not growing the way that we were growing over there, but also damaging. I don't know if it's damaging, but it was not helping that other channel. And I understand that as someone who consumes a channel, you subscribe to one thing. It's like, it'd be like getting two different podcasts, even though they're related, in the same podcast feed. You probably wouldn't do that. So I did move it over there. I think I saw before we started this stream today, though, for like 992 subscribers. So youtube.com/podcasters roundtable. If you're watching now, you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Are you going to be the 1,000? I can't say the word. That is a word I can't say. Are you going to be number 1,000? I'll do the Elmer Fudd, but just switch up the terms. Anyways, yeah. If you're number 1,000, let us know.
I made that same mistake too of blending my brands, primarily because I was trying to start a podcast network. And I thought, well, boy, podcast network, that was a big mistake also for me, or at least the way that I went about implementing it.
Too. So, I mean, we don't have to dig into why that was a mistake, but people are probably curious.
Yeah. It blended things that didn't relate with each other. And that's the main thought that I had, building on top of what Ray said, is blending the stuff that just doesn't connect. Like in my case with my podcast network, a clean comedy podcast, a podcast about podcasting, a Christian critical thinking podcast, a TV show fan podcast. Those podcasts did not have much to do with each other than some of the hosts were shared between them. And there was some commonality between quality and ideas. But it didn't work for our audience, and it didn't work in those places where I tried to combine those brands, like in an email newsletter or in the YouTube channel or an online community and such. It just didn't work. And also PayPal payments, same problem there, combining multiple brands under a single PayPal account. Don't do that. Separate everything. Even if it's only you're getting $1 per month in a PayPal account, better to have it separate now than to run into problems later where you've got all of your subscriptions or payments in one particular profile and you need to do other more advanced stuff. Stripe makes it more easy, but PayPal makes separate PayPal accounts, separate email accounts, separate. I mean, everything for your podcast, silo it, make it separate from each other. And I didn't do that early in the beginning. And it took a while to fix a lot of those things. Some of those things I can't fix.
Yeah, I think that's important because almost everyone who starts a podcast eventually starts a second podcast, even if they stop doing the one and they just do another one. But it ends up usually someone goes and has another podcast. So I think that's probably good advice. Eric, you were shaking your head. Yes. Did we get any audio?
Yes, can you hear me okay, fellas?
We do hear you. Yeah, man.
I'm
Welcome.
very sorry for being a nuisance and delaying the show.
Yeah. No one see that's the beauty, audio only. No one will ever know that, right? Once the okay, we might have chatted about it a little bit. It gave us a lesson about mistakes. Not that you made a mistake, but there was a lesson to be taught in there. So
You should just played it off intentional.
yeah,
That's right.
it was totally intentional. See, we showed you the importance. But
Well, something I'll share real quickly is I agreed definitely with Daniel. Nice to meet you fellows as well too. But yeah, branding, when you're thinking you're going to get into it, you want to try podcasting or doing videos and things like that. You think you're only going to be one brand, and it may be a brand as an umbrella, but you might tuck some of these other things under the umbrella, and all of a sudden, okay, now I've got a different name. And even like you mentioned with the PayPal donations, especially if you're going to do like a paypal.me whatever your slash whatever your name is. If you create that name, which a lot of people don't realize, PayPal yet doesn't allow you to change that name. So then you've got to re-register another PayPal account, so you made a very, very good point to keep everything separate. I love that for sure. And I also like the fact that, like I just mentioned, having these problems like this, you have to be able to act quick on your feet. And I almost didn't think I was going to be able to join you folks. And I felt very embarrassed for the sole fact I've been doing this for 4 years and I couldn't get in. So here we are.
And that's live streaming in a nutshell, man. It's always going to go bad at the last minute.
Yeah.
So, hey, if you do, if you're new to this and you feel frustrated by the gear or the process, we still have all people who've been doing it for years still have problems. Eric, what is your podcast?
Well, what I do, this is a funny thing. I do video, and I know some of the things that you've talked about in the past is, people that do a lot of audio podcasts, like the traditional podcasts, are embracing the ideas of going to video. You've talked about that. Awesome stuff. I'm the opposite way. I'm a video guy. 95% of my content is live video. I interview like a lot of rock and roll celebrities. But one time I had a fellow comment on my YouTube videos and saying, I'd really like to take your stuff on the go. Can you do audio versions? And I never even approached it. So I'm going the opposite way. I'm going from a full video content aspect to audio. And my audio game, as far as podcast, is weak. I'm a novice when it comes to the audio podcasting. So I look up to a lot of professionals like yourself. So what I'm doing is if I remember to hit record on my mixer, when I'm live with a guest, I'll record audio there because it's certainly a lot better audio there than if I bring a video down from YouTube and use all that compression and things like that. Half the time I do forget to hit that. So
handy backup. It is a handy backup. We've used it here on this show for sure.
Well, I've used it. I mean, it's good to have.
It works. That's right. I just forget to hit that because you're chit-chatting with the guest before the show and you're having fun. You're all warmed up. The last thing you remember is
sticky note, man. You got it.
I know.
It's stuff we start at. Press record.
I'm going to do that.
Everyone's going to look. If you're going to start a podcast, you're going to forget to press record. It's going to happen. So
I know. Well, one time, believe it or not, on a live show, I even forgot to hit start streaming. So I'm talking to my guest for 20 minutes.
Dude, you guys, okay. This was intentional. Yeah, it was 100%.
Exactly.
Someone tell me what this means.
I know. Oh, you're using a Roadcaster.
What does that mean?
Too.
I am showing. What am I showing on camera, Daniel?
The green button on your Roadcaster Pro.
And what does that mean?
That is not red.
It means I did not hit record. You're welcome. Just to prove a point. No, not at all. So, hey, guess what we're going to be doing? We're going to be ripping some video or some audio from YouTube. It's not going to sound great.
So, welcome. Have you pressed the button, Ray?
You know what? At this point, why?
Too late.
You're late.
I mean, I'll admit, my last, and I'm not joking, my last show, we got off to a false start. I hit the record button. I had everything going, and something happened, and I had to start the recording over again, right? We're live streaming, and it's okay. So I just, okay, we're going to start the show over. I hit record again. But apparently I missed and I didn't get it to actually record. So look down after we've been talking for 5 minutes. We've done our intros. We've talked about what writing we've been doing, but it's the first show of the new year. And I'm sitting here while my co-host is talking, trying to think of, okay, how am I going to blend this? Or what am I going to say when I start recording to make it work for both the YouTube and for the audio? And so after about 30 seconds of in my head panicking, ignoring what he said, I just kind of like, all right, so well, this is 2020, and just kind of went with it that way and abruptly changed subjects to try to blend it together. So, I mean, look, if you're doing podcast and that hasn't happened to you, wait, it will.
It will.
You know, you mentioned a co-host. That reminded me of another mistake, not in the co-hosts I've worked with, but in not communicating enough before someone became a co-host. Like laying out to them, this is what I need you to do. This is what I need you to commit to. This is what I want you to uphold, or want you to always do this or never do that kind of thing, to communicate with them ahead of time, so that not only does that give them the opportunity before they get involved to decide, well, you know what, maybe I don't want to participate and we can still be friends. But it can also then lay that foundation for later on when a problem happens. We can say, hey, remember how we talked about such and such? It feels kind of like we drifted away from that, and I think it's hurting our podcast. Can we get back to that? You're never like, you sinner, you need to repent of podcasting badly, but being gentle with it, going back to what you've already communicated. But it's not too late to communicate and kind of press the reset button a little bit on some of your podcast co-hosting. But that's something I wish I did in the beginning, because I felt like with my TV show Fan Podcast, for example, I thought I communicated to my co-hosts, I want this to be a weekly show, even during the hiatus of the TV show. I still want to produce content, at least bi-weekly. But when it came to one of those hiatuses, the co-hosts were like, there's no show. I have nothing to say. I was thinking, wait, you're a fan of the show, aren't you? Don't you still have something to say? How about you write a blog post during this time? And they're like, no, I'm not interested in writing a blog post. And I could have communicated better in the beginning.
I just thought of another mistake that I have made.
Awesome.
Not taking
mistakes.
Yeah, not taking breaks.
Yeah.
I went on a tear of almost 2 years every Sunday recording at the same time. And, it got to the point where, I was going crazy and almost panicking, because I was like, oh, I can't do all this. And I just had to get to a point where I was like, if I miss a show, it's okay. We'll make it up. Or, a 2-year run of being there every Sunday for me, family and life starts getting in the way. And so what we've done is we actually pivoted now to where our show, may not be a live broadcast on YouTube or any kind of platform, but there will be a show recorded with a variety of almost roundtable hosts that we pull in from wherever. You never know who's going to be on our show now. And so it's kind of worked out nice, because I've been able to, weather events or power outages or internet issues. We still have a show that week. I'm just not involved in it. And the guys, the normal schedule's upheld with, everybody else Sundays. So, that works out good, but not taking a break and giving yourself a chance to enjoy everything else other than podcasting, can cause a little bit of burnout after a while, and your listeners pick up on it and your viewers pick up on it.
Yeah, for sure. Bangs says that when Mark Maron did the Obama interview, he started recording an hour before the arrival. And that's actually, so never hurts to make it the first thing you do. Seriously, even before you get on here, I get distracted by seeing my friends come online, meeting new people. Definitely not the first time it's happened on this show. And with Mark, he does it to capture audio before. He's actually trying to get sort of this laid back. Sometimes magic happens, obviously, before and after you hit record, right? That's an old video interview trick, is to sort of say, okay, interview's over. People get the impression the camera's off, and then they really open up. And I don't mean like give away secrets, just that they're more comfortable when there's not a big red light in their face. But I think that's one of the reasons he does it. But you can actually, get a good tip from that by making sure it is like the first thing you do. There's no reason not to have that extra audio. And so, make sure you have enough card space for that kind of thing, or whatever, computer, your hard drive, whatever. But yeah, hit record. Like, seriously, I need that sticky note, but put that up there, hit record, make sure the numbers are rolling. Like, if you go back to like the old H4n, it blinks, you hit record and it blinks. All it means is it's armed, ready to record. You're not recording. So when you see red buttons or you see whatever is activated, make sure the numbers are moving. The numbers moving always tell you we're actually capturing stuff. So pretty important. Now, with video, it could be, a little different, because hopefully you're able to see yourself. Of course, if you have a recent Sony, well, not a recent Sony's, they fixed it with flip screens, but before, without monitors, you could be recording video and not know it. But Eric, does that work a little differently with video? You've got audio and video. So you ever get in a situation where you forgot to hit record on one of them or both or either one?
Well, with me, I don't usually do. I do a lot of commercial stuff for people. I'll do like video editing or video commercial shoots with my Nikon DSLRs, and actually, you've been a big help way back in the day with that. And
Awesome.
obviously, with a lot of DSLRs, you've got about anywhere between a 15 and a 29-minute limit of what you can record. So there has been a few times where I have ran out of tape, so to speak, and I still think we're rolling and we've lost some footage. But for my live shows, it's just a webcam and we go. But I'll share something else very embarrassing. But I mean, at the same time, I want to share the embarrassment with you to maybe make it easier with other people. For example, I'll pull this guy down here, it's a traditional NT1 microphone. I've got a bunch of them here, and it'll be easier to demonstrate here with one in my hand. So here again, I'm not a novice, but I'm not a professional either. I'm somewhere in the middle. Been doing this for a few years. And as you know, with Rode, I mean, we just talk about Rode microphones. They happen to make a nice little thing for stupid people like myself, a little gold dot on the front, letting you know that's the front where you speak. The back is where you don't speak. Well, somehow or another, in this overhead boom you just saw a moment ago, I must have, for a guest or something, must have rotated the microphone. That's the only thing I can think of. So and it's even worse when you have a sock on it. So I got to remember, Rode logo is where you speak, not the brand, not the number of the microphone. So I literally recorded my own stupidity, an entire video shoot a couple nights back or a week back, talking into the back of an NT1, literally talking into it. And I've heard better audio at a Taco Bell drive-through. It was horrible. It was the worst. And there's no EQ fix. There's nothing for that. Before that, I shot with, you commented on this mic. We're talking the NTG5, right? So I'm watching my meters on my mixer. I'm not using my ears. My meters look good. I was clipping like crazy. So that was the first one. Talking into the microphone backwards was the second one. And then I finally got stuff together and I got it right. But things like that happen. So the only advice I can get from a very novice, slightly intermediate person is never trust meters. Trust your ears. Record something. Listen to it back. I mean, I guess embarrassment is what it is. At the same time, time is money, and you got to get this stuff done, and you sometimes can't afford. No, you're doing it for yourself is a different story, but you need to take care of business too. And there's a lot of time wasted. And by the time you get that video done, the enthusiasm. It's so hard to put that smile on your face, but you still have to do it.
Yeah, I've given the advice plenty of times in my videos about teaching video. Roll some clip, play it back for yourself. You can see it, get your exposure. Get all these weird issues that you don't want to discover in the edit, right? Same with audio. That the microphone, right? The polar pattern's in the wrong spot, or maybe the XLR cable was loose, whatever. And I don't always do it myself, right? So like I don't even always take my own advice. And you're playing with fire at that point, because again, once you get into the edit, man, I mean, half the time with video, I feel like I'm fixing stuff that I wish, whether it's I didn't have a script and I just talked and I realized I didn't connect 2 points, and then you're trying to make some edit to make the thing make sense. Like a lot can happen. And, again, it's all with experience. You're going to have those experiences. That's how you'll grow. It's how you'll learn. But, if we can help mitigate those a little bit, I'm all about the embarrassment, because that is, again, like, that's how people grow. I mean, people who watch our stuff, who are here to sort of learn how to do a thing, or, it's important that they see that everyone makes those mistakes. I mean, I leave up episode 1s of stuff that sound terrible because, it's growth, right? It's growth. And maybe someone who has a professional show might not want to do that. Once they've dialed it in, you might want to then almost sort of start over, right? Like in this case, we're too deep into this episode. We're not going to start over, despite the calls for let's just do it again in the chat. But we would have fun doing that. But people are on time limits, and we've already said some stuff. That's just it. Like, people worry about capturing audio from remote guest and that it won't be the best. It can be, hey, like the content is in there, like capture it the best you can and move on. Because if it's good, if it's important, that's really what's going to move forward. And, the key is to just get better next time, right? Don't worry about what happened this time, especially if it's your stuff. It's not paying client stuff. But even if it is, fix it. You'll be fine. Just keep moving forward.
One other tip I'd like to share if I could is this is something too, again, not trusting technology. Last year, at the same time, almost the same time a year ago today, shooting at NAM, you're in a big convention center, and this could be a consumer electronics show. This could be anything. It could be any place where your Wi-Fi and signals are like fighting one another. I shot about 12 to 15 videos and using wireless products, and good products that I believe in, obviously Rode, and using the Rode reporter as my mic and the filmmaker kit. Sorry, the news reporter kit. And out of 12 videos, 11 no problem. I'm in a bit of an isolation booth with Roland Boss, and everything. I just thought everything's working. It worked the last 11 shoots. Some frequency was competing with me, and even though the Rode product and many products will try to scan to find the next available signal, if something happened and I had zero audio. So never trust gear, never trust it. Always trust your ears. So what I should have done is had an earbud into the receiver, to the transmitter, I should say, to make sure I'm hearing what I'm getting. And I would have known that there was a problem, or the receiver, I guess I should say. So there's another loss on my part that people can maybe avoid. So always have a monitor.
For sure. I mean, and your ears, for everything, trust your ears. When it comes to post-production, people are like, oh, is that too much compression? Not enough compression. How does it sound? Like, ultimately, how does it sound? That's going to be the most important part. And, monitoring is hugely important. There are a lot of DSLRs that don't even have headphone jacks. But again, if you can roll clip and listen back, that helps a lot. Same goes with audio, right? Especially if you're like, I go to conferences and record like 4 people for an episode. I can monitor that because I'm by myself. But if you are the host and the producer, play it back. See that everything is just okay, right? You can fix small problems, but make sure everyone's got audio from their microphone and monitor the source. I see a lot of people monitor off their mixer, but then their mixer has a recorder plugged into it. And guess what? Something really bad can happen between the mixer and the recorder. No batteries. Who knows what it is, right? Corrupt a card. Bad cable. Monitor the source, the endpoint. Where is the audio being recorded? Monitor that. But anyway, speaking of video, I mean, you had an article about 3 reasons to add video to your podcast, Eric, but and it was fine, but we have actually recently sort of dove into that. I think we talked more about your podcast being on YouTube, right? Should your podcast be on YouTube? And that's one of the 3 things that article suggested, but also that just video was so powerful these days that your podcast needs to also be found the places where people are finding video. But you have a focus you're thinking about taking your video show and going audio only. So what about YouTubers? I generally use that almost generic as video, going into audio podcast. Why haven't you done that at this point? What are your concerns, or what does it add to your workflow that you're kind of dreading maybe?
Well, I'm not really dreading it, but at the same time, a lot of us, I'm going to use myself as an example, and I think a lot of people who are YouTubers first are making big mistakes. I certainly am, because I'm not producing a nice show, so to speak, where fancy intros, audio intros and tags and things like that. I'm taking basically a rip of my shows, cleaning them up and putting them on YouTube. On various platforms like Spotify, iTunes. I'm on there, and also Google Music, Google Play, whatever. So I'm there, but I never thought of it until I mentioned earlier that a fan said, I'd really like to take your stuff to the gym or in the car. And so then I started doing that. It was strictly all iTunes. I put them on my website, and I had to use all the RSS, believe it or not, I'm still using FeedBurner to push my stuff.
We talked about that. We actually talked about that, how that is still a thing. It's still in play here in 2020.
Right? Yeah. Why I've always had the motto, why fix what's not broke?
Well,
it works.
There are reasons to fix what's not broken.
I know.
It's kind of broken in this case, but we won't go into a whole FeedBurner.
Okay, don't judge me too hard. But anyways, I pushed it off there, and so I started putting episodes up there, maybe a half a dozen, and then I would miss, let's say, 3 shows. And I was religious for a while, where I was running 4 shows a week, independent shows. And if I wasn't putting these shows up, people were saying, I was really looking forward to the audio. Where is it? So then I realized people were listening. I started looking at my analytics, and they're not crazy good, but they're good. And it meant that people were listening. So I was like, oh man, I got to get down to this. So sometimes it would happen where I'd go about, 6 episodes, and I'd have to cram, like an exam, and get all these audios downloaded and get them all cleaned up and put them up to the various podcast sources. But I think it's great, because one thing I learned, I used to work in radio for about 8 years. I wasn't the radio person, but I was the web guy in radio. And, when traditional radio is starting to change and they're adapting, we have to hit people where they are, when they are. And I think it was Alan Cross. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Alan Cross, but he's a great name in broadcasting. And he called it ego casting, where what he meant by that was people want the music and the content. I'm using music as a term, but content when they want it, where they want it. So we can't just predict that people want video. We can't just predict that people want audio. They want what they want at their time, at their schedule, on their device. So if I was saying I'm not going to give you audio because it's too much work, well, then I just eliminated a major part of my possible audience. And maybe those people I would have brought to audio would have never known about my video. So it's a 360 that I think, keeps us going, and it's just a thing that keeps bringing in new content from audio to video to video to audio. Now, I think a lot of us in the YouTube game have to really, really give the people on the audio portion a really special treatment. I'm not there yet, and I'm learning. I'm still learning in video, but it's something I embrace greatly. And I hope with my goals in the near future to the distant, maybe 1 year from now, that I can say that I'm just as proud of my audio as I am of the video shows. And the video is still a work in progress too.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sure someone listening or watching had the thought when people said, I want to take you to the gym. Like, the answer is not use the YouTube app, dummy. Like, you don't have to watch the video. Like, that's not actually what they're telling you, right?
Yeah.
They want it in the place. And maybe even, then there's a consideration, like, is it different, right? Right. You're answering sort of that call, which is, I want it as audio only, probably in my podcast app with my other stuff. But Kevin, do you think there's a difference? You were asking, so when I looked up podcasterroundtable.com/guests, get you on a list, you get to say kind of what you might want to talk about. Kevin, you mentioned about, do podcasts need to be video? And do you think there's a difference in the presentation? Did you guys end up going to video as you were contemplating that?
Yeah, we ended up going to video, and we did it for a long time as a trial run. Like, okay. And the main reason we ended up making the decision is we were really debating it. And everybody on the show kind of was like, hey, it's my decision, but I wanted to get their take on it. One, because if you're on the show, then you're going to have to be comfortable with having, even if nobody watches, your image and all your house and whatever still in the image.
You mean guest or co-host? I mean
co-host.
Okay.
Co-host. And so
sorry, hold on. Are you doing basically a video version of your podcast? So what we're doing here is it already different? Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what we ended up settling on ours. But the main thing that tilted us that direction was Mixler had we were broadcasting every Sunday night, and Mixler had a big issue to where you would broadcast and it would cut out, and it was just
audio only live. Yeah. If anyone is not familiar.
Yeah, sorry about that. So they would have an issue where it wouldn't work well. The service wasn't living up to what it needed to be. And that was kind of the thing of, well, if this isn't working, let's give this YouTube thing a shot. And so we spent 6 or 7 weeks just kind of publishing out the shows. They're private. They're unlisted. They're still unlisted. Some of them went private because they were absolutely horrible for a video standpoint. But and obviously we've missed shows where we couldn't broadcast live or we couldn't do the live streaming that week. But I've gotten surprising results out of it that I never thought I would hear, and it's been very encouraging for my listeners.
Like what?
A lot of my longtime listeners, especially my longtime streamers that have been around, the core unit of that said they really appreciate it because they said that it's like they're in the room with us, a part of the conversation. And while there is a little bit of lag, we respond to their comments, we read their comments and everything. And we try to make it to where it doesn't impact the podcast as much. And that we say, hey, well, so-and-so said this, not just talk about what they said without saying it. But they said that they feel part of it and they're part of the show from a production standpoint, they're able to feed us things and they see our reactions when we read it, or they see us laughing a little bit. Even though we may not mention it, they know that's what caused it. So you know, they really appreciate being there, and it's like they're just in the room, and a little bit of their voice is actually part of the show. So that's been a very positive, the biggest thing that I've taken away from it. And just the fact that, you know, I mean, we don't have a lot of subscribers. We've only got a couple episodes out there right now that are public right now. We're still fine tuning everything. I don't even, like you mentioned earlier, I don't even have a link on the website to the YouTube channel yet. So we're still kind of refining it and honing it a little bit, but it's something that I think we're very happy to keep doing and just try to get better and better at it. You know, Eric, you mentioned that, you know, you have a very polished YouTube channel, and then you go into podcasts and it doesn't happen that way. And I'm in the same way, just reversed. I've got a more polished product when it comes to podcasting, but my YouTube channel is, to me, not the best. You know, it's got a lot of issues, a lot of things, decisions that have been made that, well, we're going to just stick with what we got instead of changing things up to be consistent, and then we'll tweak things later to improve. But you know, that's just part of it, right? The most important thing is we're generating something and putting it out there when they want to see it and how they want to maintain the content. As content creators, you know, that's what my ultimately came down to is how do people want to see my podcast, and do I want to take advantage of the largest search engine in the world?
Well, you said something there that is amazing. And you nailed it right on the head, because I get the same comments or compliments or whatever. Let's say I'm interviewing a musical celebrity that we've all grown up listening to, you know, from the 80s or whoever, and they feel, the guests in the chat feel like they say the exact same things. They feel like they're there in the living room. And that's something you don't get by watching your traditional networks on TV. You know, they're smart. They've, over the past, you know, 5 years or so, they've been smart by having these apps and text your question to so and so, we can ask on the air, or, you know, vote in a poll if you're a Walking Dead fan and you say who, you know, blah blah blah. You know, these fun interactive things, but there's nothing more interactive and immediate interaction as we have on YouTube. So if you can take that, you know, and engage with the fans, and they feel like they're there in the living room, not compared to like a kind of a stiff, you know, interview, formal, corporate, you know, you just feel like you're there with your buddy, and meanwhile it's one of your heroes that you grew up with. So I mean, hey, hit me up after the show, and I'd love to trade some ideas. I'll share whatever I know about video, and if you want to help me with some audio, I mean, that's what these things are great for. We meet new people in the community and we learn from one another. So, but you definitely nailed it when you said feeling like you're there in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel, I wanted to go back to what Eric was saying, how, you know, at this point, and kind of reverse for Kevin, that he's ripping audio from YouTube and then throwing it into basically a podcast feed. So people can get that audio only, but it's really kind of like, you know, people asked, and so he gave them what he could give them, right? And then at some point he probably wants to polish that up. But do you think, you know, outside of, you know, Bandrew's in the chat and he's talking about how sometimes, you know, people will say, you know, I pointed the camera at the roadcaster and I said, look at that. And I made sure to say, I'm showing the record button, right? We're pretty cognizant of that. Not saying just look at that and not describing to the audio only, because more people are going to hear the audio only version of this than they are going to see it. But people have both options. And one of the reasons we do this is because it's partly convenience. It allows us to connect with the others remotely, record it live. And so it's both of those things. And it draws in new audience. Again, it helps, you know, doesn't hurt to be inside of YouTube for search and discovery. So, but do you think a podcast needs to be more than just your ripped YouTube video? You know, like, you may do a nice YouTube video, might have yours is going to have a audio intro. It's going to have video, but you could be just audio. You're going to describe the product. And if you're thinking about the audio only audience, is that enough? Or do you think it needs to be packaged differently for a podcast? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, I know you do video as well, and I don't know that you translate that necessarily to audio only. I think sometimes we've put our video stuff in a podcast feed, but separate from that, if you are on YouTube and you're thinking of doing a podcast, and, you know, all of these things we're talking about, it's extra time, it's extra work, right? And we might be just surviving to get out one version of our show. So, but what do you think? What do you think about that? Just sort of delivering it in a podcast feed versus needing to be more of an experience that a podcast audience might be expecting?
It takes work, I think, some very deliberate work to make content that does work very well across all platforms. And I mean, a lot of work to really do it well. So much that you're going to end up sacrificing some of the uniquenesses on one platform or another. But it is possible to do, but then you're kind of making your content not as interesting in those places. I think it's easier to go from the assumption that you're recording audio and live streaming it like we're doing here with Podcasters Roundtable than to go the other way around, where you're used to doing video, but then you decide, well, I'm just going to rip the audio from this. You can adapt to that, but there's something that's going to be lost in the process. Like, for example, I've started playing this game on Xbox called Borderlands 3. And there's the Borderlands show on YouTube, which is the official show from the Borderlands developers and Borderlands team, where they're talking about the video game. They're showing some things, they're describing things. Most of it is spoken content and could be released as a podcast. Podcasts don't exist on YouTube, by the way. I want to throw that in there. But they don't have it as a podcast. However, I did realize that because of some of the content that they mix in, there would be places where if they just ripped the audio and put it in a podcast, it would be extremely frustrating to listen to these certain whole sections. I'm not just saying something that someone refers to in a moment, but an entire section of the episode that would be pointless to listen to. So if you're going to make your content truly multi-purpose, then that means you have to sacrifice certain things like that won't be in your video where people could watch it because you're thinking about your audio audience. But I think you could work around that. You could prepare for that in certain ways. You could have bonuses, but to do it well does take more work than I think you'd be comfortable with.
I think you nailed it right there as well too, because I sometimes get criticized for this. I tend to read my chat. I'm very bad for reading my live chat, but someone will jump in, they'll say, you know, and I'll say, hey, Bob says hi, Joe says hi, Laura says hi. You know, I recognize people in the chat, and that becomes a big nuisance listening to that in the audio podcast. And sadly, that's all I do right at the moment. I just rip the audio from YouTube and put it up there. But what I always like to think of my audience right now, while I can still manage that, there's going to come a day probably where I won't be able to acknowledge everybody. And I'm trying to acknowledge them, to appreciate they're taking their time out of their days when there's millions of people doing what we do. But I can see that point too. You need to kind of dedicate what you're going to put on the audio format, because people are what's our attention span. We don't want to sit there and wait for it. We want to hear what the meat and potatoes are of this thing you're discussing. They don't want to hear who's in the chat. They want to just hear the content. And I'll admit, I'm one of those people that just gives people the audio version of what I've done online, but it kind of saves them. Like Ray was saying earlier, people aren't going to be at the gym and streaming the video portion and just listening to it, because a lot of people with their data plans, that's going to kill their data plan by watching one of my 90-minute episodes. So it's a catch-22, but I think there's a learning curve for all of us. You know, I greatly, and I heard Ray mention earlier Bandrew in the chat. I don't have my chat open at the moment, but I love Bandrew and what he does. So I really want to watch all of you guys, what you do with audio, and learn, because I do realize all of us have to contribute on every platform there is if we want to succeed. And yeah, I think you really had great points.
You know, I even think about a recent potential mistake I made that's related to this. Is I recorded several videos at Podcast Movement where I interviewed different vendors who had interesting products or new updates and such. And I did that through video. I brought my video light, my wireless microphone, everything, pointing the microphone back and forth. But most of that didn't even need to be video because we weren't showing anything.
Yeah.
My conversation with Libsyn, for example, where we're talking about Libsyn's latest updates and Rob Greenlee joining the team. It's Rob Greenlee and I sitting on chairs, because he's so much taller than me that I didn't want to have to frame the video awkwardly. But there's no reason that it needed to be video. And in that case, because I published it only as video, at least at this point, it's published only as video, my audio audience, which is the majority of my audience, isn't getting to enjoy that content unless they take that extra step to go look at it when they hear me say I published some videos, then they have to remember to go check it out. Whereas maybe what I could do, and maybe I will do this, is maybe take all of those interviews that work in audio, stitch them together in an episode, put in a bumper, an intro to it, and say, these are the interviews I recorded. All of these videos are available if you want to see us, but I've only chosen the videos that work well in audio, and put that out as an audio episode. And then more of my audience would get to enjoy that content than have enjoyed the videos so far.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to actually comment on what you're saying earlier about, talking to the chat and everything, because I've actually, going back to when I was broadcasting over Mixler, we actually got a lot of negative comments about just speaking to the people in the chat, because they're like, hey, for those of us that aren't there, A, we feel left out, and B, it's annoying because we really don't care. And so what we've tried to do is almost treat the chat like other people in the room. So try not to say things like, hey, they typed this, or they put this message up, just like, oh, treat them like they're just off mic. Like, oh, you, like you would somebody who's asking a question at a conference. You're going to repeat it and then comment to them like they actually said it and they're part of it. It's a little bit of a mental thing. Since we've done that, the same people that were complaining before, just like, hey, I've really enjoyed Rodney's interaction. You should have him on microphone. Well, I have no idea where Rodney is. I mean, I actually do, but I mean, where he was that day, I don't know, And so it's just the delivery, and it just takes practice and honestly, consciously thinking about it. I'm helped out because, with all the different co-hosts, I could take a little bit more time and think about how to introduce something while they're covering something else a little bit. So I do want to mention that's been a positive thing for us on that front.
I want to point out that as we talk about video and podcast and being on camera, that we have 4 squares. There are 4 different people on here for audio only listeners, but everyone has some kind of color light going on. I don't know if it's the 2019, 2020 thing, but what I see is everyone's taken care, right? Everyone cares. Everyone's got good audio, and they've obviously thought about what's in their background. So just if you're hearing this only, I thought that was very interesting. And, that's another element of being on video, and can be one of those things that is hard. Besides yourself, you also sometimes have to think about your background. There's more to think about when you're on video, right?
Oh, I mean, my lighting on my face is horrible compared to everybody else's. I don't have a good light in front of me.
On your face is the most important part.
Yeah, and I mean, it's off to the side, and so I don't, and looking at like, okay, what does it take to get into it? It's the same thing as what does it take to get into podcasting? Yeah, you can go with the really expensive gear or ATR 1200. You can get a acceptable, decent quality that 99.9% of people are going to accept and appreciate the effort, versus going all in, and you might grow to that stage. And I think the YouTube video side is the same way. You can start basic and work your way into it, because you don't want to go throwing down tons of money if you decide it's really not for your show, because it may not be.
Yeah, you stand out though. You've got a nice backlight. The blue is nice. You stand out. It's almost like you have a hair light on you. It's enough that you're cutting through. I've seen a hell of a lot worse.
Well, that's my thinning hair reflecting what's up here. So
no, it looks good. No complaints. And I'm a dark. I'm more dark. That's just been my shtick forever for the first main part, because I could never figure out lighting. But now that I've got a ring light on my face, which is just off the monitor. The ring light is my savior. And every once in a while, I'll turn on a little homemade little softbox on my head. I've got LED panels off to the side, just illuminating the back. But it doesn't have to be expensive. As long as you can see, as long as you're illuminated, and webcams need good light, like any camera needs good light. Just give yourself, you're the main star, you're the focus. So get some light on your face. You got it. You look good.
Well, I did get one comment that in one of my first episodes, I joked that I had the face for radio and the voice for print, and they said I'm breaking both of my rules now.
There you go. Oh, you look good.
Yeah, that's eventually when you're listening to this and then you end up on the roundtable, I think my email definitely. And I don't think this time because you guys knew, but I definitely say grab whatever mic you have, the best mic you have, and USB is plenty fine. I try to, people might think, oh, I'm going on that show. These guys talk about microphones. I can't have a USB mic. No, you understand that. Again, when it comes to video, the other thing I say is put some light on your face. So light matters no matter what you have, right? There are different ways, even cheap light. You can make cheap light look good, but the main point is, like Eric said, video, it's a camera. It wants light. It works on light, right? That's how it captures images. And with microphones, almost anything you have is going to be better than the nothing or the thing that's built into your computer. And it has to do with proximity, right? The main thing about having a microphone is that it's more likely to be closer to your face than something that is, not actually separate from the computer. So very easy, right? Just having those two things. Click a light on, because we do want to see you. And the part of the thing about the extra element of having video is that people love. They're just like, oh man, I've been listening to you for a year. I had no idea what you look like. I thought you look so much. You sound like you're a lot taller, which I'm sure if you meet me, you'll be like, oh, if you meet Dave Jackson, I don't know, does Dave Jackson, he's really tall. Like, we are not the same height, clearly. And, but people do enjoy seeing who they've been listening to. It is that sort of next step in a connection. And then beyond that, live is even more of a connection. I'm enjoying StreamYard because we can throw the comments right up here in real time. And, you guys talked about interacting with the chat audience. And as long as I, read the question that's being said, it adds to the show. I mean, it is that the audience at that point is another roundtabler. There might as well be a fifth person, or, right now we have 4. It is one extra person on the stream every time. I don't get as many, we really get into a topic and we run out of time. I don't get as many comments in here, and you got to watch the chat, right? You do have to multitask a bit when you're live streaming. But, I think it's a really cool value add. But I think that, Kevin, what you're saying, like, I think it's really important element. I mean, like, Daniel, or does anyone else, do you guys think that if you're going to do live chat during the thing and you actually want to respond to the audience, is that an editing thing? Do you think you should edit that out? Because I don't know, as a listener to an audio only show, I don't know that I always am showing up for the audience the way I'm showing up for the host, or do not feel part of it. I thought important part there, Kevin, was saying, like, look, we kind of feel left out. And I would say the people tuning in live, they are the power user. It is not the majority of your audience. And the majority probably maybe is not necessarily there. I hate when the news generally talks to people, because I'm like, I'm looking for news and don't really care with the opinion. Or sports, when people run the sports, they talk to the fans. You know what? I don't really care about the fans. I'm here to hear your expert analysis. Any thoughts on that?
So we look at it as in 2 ways. One, for the most part, I'm usually the main one that interacts with the chat, although there's a couple others that do as well for specific listeners that would just they really contribute a lot to the show. And our show's kind of broken up, like, hey, here's the intro, we're kind of cutting her off, we're goofing off with everybody. That's more lighthearted and there's more banter with the group. What we normally find out is the chat goes completely in a different direction, or they get one thing you say and it just runs in a direction that you have to leave behind after a while. Mm-hmm. The second part is when we get to a topic, we make sure it's relevant to the topic. And if it's relevant to the topic and it's a question that's presented, most likely somebody else has that same question. And so we try to frame it to where, we tell people in the chat sometimes before we start recording, or they know because it's the same people week after week usually. I mean, we got a core of 10 people that it's solid, those 10, and then whoever else may trickle in. But they know that if you post something, we have complete rights to rip that question like it's our own, or rip that comment like it's our own, just because integrating in the chat can be difficult and disjoining. And I was like, if you have a problem with that, you don't have to participate in the chat. And we just try to lay it out like this is what helps the show grow. And if you're here, you're a fan of the show and you want to see the show grow, we try to give credit where credit is due. But we try to make sure when we phrase it or mention it, it's unique and fits the topic.
Eric, do you integrate live chat into your streams?
Yeah, I do. I do very much so.
Throughout, or in beginning or end?
Throughout. What I'll usually do is I'll introduce the guest, and we'll take a few minutes. We'll warm up with a couple questions, and then I'll say to the guest, we're going to jump over to the live chat. and I am bad for catching everybody, but I try my very, very best. I'll admit that that's a fault of mine, but I will acknowledge almost everybody, and then we'll jump back and I'll try to highlight where I might have left off, so I can have. I wish YouTube had a thing where you could kind of flag where you left off. I'll
Yeah.
just kind of highlight their name, and I can kind of see that. I'll go back, do a few more questions. We'll jump back to the chat, and it's really nice when people tag you because you can really, really see the question. And like I'm a little bit religious about it. I go overboard with it because I really want to thank these people for joining us. And I do get comments from people saying, don't worry about the people in chat, worry about your guest. And I've even said it to some of my guests. I said I feel bad because these people are saying, I should ignore them and whatever. And they're like, no, I'm here to hear what they have to say. And I really appreciated some of my guests saying that, so I'll acknowledge it. But I do think at the same time, and people do get that warm and fuzzy feeling. And I'm not going to lie, I've enjoyed hearing my name mentioned. If I'm in a chat and I say hi to Bob, and Bob says, "Oh, Eric's here," it's a fun fuzzy feeling you don't get on TV. I'm not going to lie, it's a nice comfort feeling. Do you expect it? No, but if they say your name, you feel pretty cool, right? But when it goes to the audio version, like you guys have talked about earlier, I know for sure I need to start cutting that out because people just don't want to hear that. They want, out of my 90-minute show, I could probably condense that down to 50 minutes, maybe 60 minutes if I took out all those Bob says hi, Teresa says hi, and that kind of stuff. But I do respect the chat and welcome and acknowledge them as much as humanly possible.
Daniel, you used to do live, but it was sort of your live was a reaction show, right? So
Well, I did 2 live shows for a TV show. The first show was recorded, right after the TV show aired. So everyone who was watching live had also just seen the show. So sometimes there would be a lot of, wow, I can't even right now comments. But then we also did a midweek show, which was where we dug into the TV show in much more detail. And in both of those, we were doing them live because it was really engaging with our audience, especially immediately after the TV show aired. And we would incorporate the audience comments as feedback in addition to feedback that we already received. We would receive emails from some people that was a book practically of content from them, and we'd boil it down to their main points and sometimes reference it, sometimes directly quote certain things from it. Same thing with the chat room. I would be keeping an eye on the chat room as we're talking, and when something was relevant, I would bring it into the conversation because it was, like you were saying, they were a guest or a co-host sort of with us in the podcast. Or like Tim Schwartz said in our chat, tried to include the chat whenever possible or relevant. Inception. That's the Inception sound.
you don't have that on your Roadcaster? You
I
don't
should
that
have that.
Inception button? Come on,
There
man.
is like inceptionbutton.com or something like that, where it's just a single website, big button, press it, you get that sound.
Probably immediately get flagged for the video.
Yeah.
But it's not only bringing the audience in, making them feel a part of it, it also makes our content better. And there were many times that we got something wrong and the chat room helped correct us. So it was great to then say, oh, John in the chat room just pointed out that, no, it happened this way, or we missed this certain thing. And that comes from that multitasking. While someone else is talking, you're listening to them as you're also watching the chat room a little bit to see what's going on and watching it a little while you're talking. And bringing them in that way makes them feel part of it, makes a better show because we're providing more perspectives and sometimes correcting incorrect things that we say. And there are times too when you can throw a question to the chat room, but you have to make sure that you make time for them to respond. Because if I were to ask a question right now to the chat room, there's the delay of how long it takes the video to get to them, which is usually up to 30 seconds or even longer, depending on their software or devices. And then there's the time it takes them to type their response after thinking about their response. So we could just sit here waiting for them to respond. Or I could say, I want to know from everyone in the chat room, whose lighting background do you like the best? Mention it in the chat right now. Let us know what you think. And I personally think, and then I can continue on with the conversation and then start bringing in those comments later. And it brings content, it keeps the flow, and it makes a community. And that's what's so much fun about that engagement.
I like when the audience would become sort of the expert, sort of the fact checker in real time. I think Twit was one of the first to really have a massive audience while streaming, right? They were in live early. They had like 1,000 people in there, their chat. And when they'd get something wrong, as a listener, I'm yelling at the iPod at that point, hey, no, that is not. And, the chat will certainly, you won't miss it because 30 people, the chat will just fill up, right? They'll just start scrolling up the same answer. No, it's 28 megabytes, not, whatever it is, right? And that in real time, you're like, oh man, thank you. You did the thing I couldn't do at the moment. I'm listening to the download version, but it got corrected in live in real time. I definitely think there's a balance because the download listener might not be there, for all the live interaction, the highs, and there are things you can do before and after, like thanking or saying names or welcoming. Like those are easy to cut in the edit if you batch them, like you bulk them right in the middle or the end instead of sort of sprinkling it throughout. I mean, if I said hi to everyone as they came into the chat, that would probably not function very well for the conversation.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the Twitch approach, though, right? I mean, if you've ever watched any kind of streaming on Twitch or anything like that, as soon as somebody does anything, they're all, because they're wanting the super chats, they're wanting all the stuff, the things like that. So you get a lot of that. Going back to what you just said about, needing the chat to be your fact checker, I depend on it. We say that we're not experts in the motorcycling world. We just are guys like sitting around talking about it. And I depend on people who, when I'm sitting here trying to do a podcast, try to keep everything going, trying to figure out what the topic is we're going to do and doing everything else that you're doing, Googling something as you're discussing it isn't always possible. So having them be able to say, hey, I just looked this up and the model of that engine, the last production run was on this year. That helps out a lot. And sometimes we'll throw it out there. Like Daniel said earlier, I was like, hey, can somebody in the chat look this up for me and keep going. And if they come back, great. If they don't, then we move on. And I haven't been called out yet. So
right on.
I think we can always learn from our audiences for sure. I love that. Just like I've been a salesperson my entire life. And I've always said, if people come and ask me something about an XYZ product, I'll say, you know what, honestly, I don't know, but I'll find out for you. And we can use that in our chats. If we're like, because my community is all guitar, that's what we talk about, music equipment. And they'll say, what kind of pickups come in that? I'm like, you should know, Eric, because you talk about this. I'm like, I don't know. I see so-and-so. I see Bob in the chat. I see him talking about guitar all the time. Bob, what kind of pickups come in this guitar? And the delay, of course. We get our answer. Everyone's happy. We move on. And then you don't look like you're trying to be the know-it-all.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Well, I'm excited that you got in, Eric, and we got the other half of the conversation we wanted to have, and I had a great time. So, gonna bail out here. We are gonna let those people in the chat go home. Let's go home, quote unquote. Watch something else, and then wait for another roundtable so they come back. But let us know where we can find your podcast, your YouTube channel. Give us one. And we'll head on out of here. But Eric, again, first time roundtable. Glad to have you here. Have fun at NAMM. I know you are going out there to grab some videos. So good luck with that. And hopefully, fingers crossed for no equipment failures.
I just want to say thank you because I mean you're an icon to me. Honestly, you are. I've been following you since the day you got onto YouTube, and there's a circle of people as you know who they are. You've been a great influence to me, a role model, and I love what you do. And these other fellows we've met tonight, I'm very thrilled to meet you, and I'll certainly reach out to you as well too. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And where should we send everyone to get your guitar content? Because I got a bass over there, and I need more information about it because I'm new to it.
Happy to help you. The easiest way is it'll take you to the same place, musicgearnetwork.ca or youtube.com/musicgearnetwork.
Awesome. Thanks for all the kind words. Safe travels, and we'll get you back on the roundtable.
Thank you.
Kevin, man, first time roundtable as well. 2 first timers. I love that. It's always the best. Thanks for joining me. And last minute, Kevin was our last minute added. First, I always go last minute. I'm going to grab someone out of the bucket. So Kevin, thanks for being available and joining us, man.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I've been wanting to put my name in the hat for a while, and I finally thought of a topic that I thought suited well, and just appreciate the opportunity. Eric, I got my son a Yamaha Junior for Christmas, so we may have to look up some of your stuff, and I'm trying to get back into playing with him as well. I used to play years ago, so we'll have to look you up and see what content you have. But you could check out my show, throttledpodcast.com, and YouTube, we'll figure out the links there. I'm trying to work on some of the names.
It'll be on the same domain. You'll be able to get there on the same domain.
Yeah. But throttlepodcast.com is where all my stuff is. And I appreciate Ray having me on. I appreciate everything that you guys do, and would love to come back if you ever need me.
For sure. All right. And co-host Daniel J. Lewis, there's 2/3 of us here today. Dave is on the road. I think he's got to be doing something podcasting, right? He's at a conference for podcasting. I'm sure of it. Clearly didn't get a chance to. I think he's doing a meetup, so he couldn't be in the roundtable. But Daniel J. Lewis holding down the co-host role, and so am I. We're co-hosts. So thanks, man.
Thank you. My eggnog is gone, so I must be too. You can find me at theaudacity2podcast.com.
Cool. Well, there must be something good in the eggnog if you're gone. Oh, maybe it's time to go. It's time to go for more eggnog. All right. I don't have Christmas music on this Roadcaster, but it's over. We're 2020. We'll see you. Again, podcastersroundtable.com/guest. And if you are being held back, we used to do topics. It will ask you what you want to talk about. If you just put a few interests in there, it's fine. You don't have to have a topic. We now just grab news stories. You can see we pretty much just jammed on whatever. I throw one subject out there. We jam on it for a half hour. We could go on 2 topics. It doesn't matter. Super casual. Just we want you to join us here. We want to see new roundtablers, new people every time as much as we can. And we will see you next time. So thanks for joining us. Wave goodbye. We're out. Thanks, everyone.